No mai, haere mai, piki mai, kāke mai, kia ora, and welcome to 30 with Guyon Espiner. 30 minutes, one guest, no cuts. What we record is what you get. Jordan Williams is the head of the Taxpayers Union. With 200,000 members and supporters, it's one of the largest lobby groups in New Zealand now. For the last 10 years, he's called out wasteful government spending and been a high-profile advocate of free speech and transparency. So what is the Taxpayers Union trying to achieve, and where does it fit in the international movement advocating right-wing economic reform? Let's start the clock then. 30 minutes with Jordan Williams. Kia ora, Jordan Williams, thank you very much for coming into 30. We really appreciate it.
Kia ora, Guyon.
Let's start simply. What is the Taxpayers Union? What are you trying to achieve?
Well, it's exactly the same pitch as it was when we launched it just over 10 years ago. There are hundreds of groups, special interests out there, generally on the centre-left, that argue for more money for their particular pet cause. It might be, the protection of the albino snail or whatever. We're the ones on the other side to argue for mom and pop taxpayers, the ones that pay the bill. Until government spending is all being spent well and you've got no government waste, why should we reach deeper into families' back pockets to tax more?
And we'll get into some of those issues, but give me a sense of scale. I mean, you've got, 18, 20 employees? It's quite a big operation now.
Yeah, we're a bit smaller than that now. Post-election, we're sort of just taking a little bit more cautiously to see where the new equilibrium is. But yeah, at some point, I think early last year in the Three Waters debate, I sort of looked and realised on payroll we had 18 staff. This thing started with me just part-time and then me and a mate.
So the size of a small newsroom, pretty much.
Yeah, well, we are, though, in fairness, on the one hand, we are now the largest per capita taxpayer group in the English-speaking world. We're not quite the largest per capita in the world. The Finns have that, but they've been going, I think, 100 years, and they actually have software that do your taxes. So it's a little bit different of a business model. They've got 250,000 financial members. The super-sized ones in South Korea, there's multiple taxpayers.
Okay, but you're pretty sizable. And income last year, I read nearly $3 million or $2.8 million.
Of donations, yeah.
Where does that money come from?
Donations.
So, but that's your total revenue?
Yeah, so it is, particularly post-COVID, it's grassroots fed. More than 80% of our income in 2022 and 2023 is pretty similar. I've gone through, I should have scaled up in the exact figures, it'll be roughly the same, is small dollar donations. Online donations averaging about between $75, $85, depending on the campaign. That's the bulk of it. And
you say your largest donor is your landlord, Sir Bob Jones. And
does he reading our book?
Does he give you free rent there, does he?
Yeah, Sir Bob is very generous, and cumulatively he would be our largest donor because of the office in Wellington, which he donates.
So you get free rent in Wellington from Bob Jones, Sir Bob Jones, yeah. I mean, you say you're not politically aligned, but it's hard to escape that this is a hard right lobby group, isn't it? I mean, on your board, you've got Chris Milne, who's the ACT Chief of Staff. You've got John Boscawen, who was a ACT Party MP and Minister. You've got Ruth Richardson, who probably competes with Roger Douglas as being the most right-wing finance minister we've ever had. So it's
a high calibre board. And don't forget our chair.
It's a right-wing lobby group, though, isn't it?
Our chair is a former head of New Zealand Institute of NZIER, Economic Research. I'm very lucky to have such a great board that are all volunteers. And about hard right's a bit unfair. I mean, let's step back. We advocate for lower taxes. 2/3 of New Zealanders agree with that. We advocate for more transparency. 95 New Zealanders would agree with that. And we argue for more accountability. Well, nearly all New Zealanders would agree with that.
All right, let's talk a little bit about transparency and where the money comes from, because you do have a lot of corporate members. Have you got the big alcohol companies, for example?
Well, hang on. The total industry money of the total budget is less than 3% of our revenue. So that's all. That's the grog, the nicotine companies, sugar, soda, whatever. That is just Well, it's less than 3%.
And
for a taxpayer group, that's the lowest I'm aware of anywhere in the world
Okay, so
in terms of industry support.
But it is alcohol companies, sugar, fast food, and nicotine and tobacco, right?
Yeah, well, that's how we define industry as where it's businesses that have joined because their particular product is under the threat or potentially regulated or specific taxes.
Let's talk a bit about tobacco. Casey Costello, the government minister responsible for tobacco now, right? She was a former chair, wasn't she, of the Taxpayers Union? And donated to the Taxpayer Union, and that's how you first met her?
Yeah, and she donated to the Taxpayers Union, and as a lot of my day is contacting donors and thanking them for making the work possible. Casey was very interesting, clearly really passionate about public policy, very strong, North Star, particularly around the democratic accountability that obviously she's involved with Hobson's Pledge and the like. I asked her to join my board. She's an incredible New Zealander. She's a former detective, great BS detector. Just, she's one of those people that probably speaks the least at a board meeting, but what she says is usually the wisest.
Okay. Did you play any role in the Taxpayers Union in helping her formulate the tobacco
No, not at all.
policy?
In fact, I do not think I've ever discussed tobacco matters with Casey Costello, and I can certainly say she didn't have involvement in any of that fundraising or with those industry members. For quite a practical reason is that Casey is wonderful, but she's too humble to fundraise. She wouldn't close the deal.
Why is the Taxpayers Union so interested in tobacco policy? Because you sent someone to Panama, didn't you, to oppose the World Health Organization conference in Panama in February this year?
Yeah, so there was our colleagues in the US, a very good friend of mine, David Williams, who runs the Taxpayers Protection Alliance. They've been particularly focused around the unaccountability of, I forget the name of the particular wing of the World Health Organization. But in short, New Zealand's got a great story to tell. We have successfully dramatically reduced smoking rates because we've got people on to vaping.
We've also done.
This is what.
I've looked, just with respect, I've looked very closely at this issue for many months, and a lot of the literature says we've reduced those smoking rates partly because of the thing you hate, which is tax, and we've whacked the excise tax on it to such a degree that they have become pretty unaffordable.
Well, in fairness, the tax has also driven a huge illicit market in tobacco in New Zealand. It's about 15%. There's 4 big tobacco companies in the world. The fourth largest supplier in New Zealand is the illicit market, and it's possibly going to be the second soon. And all we were saying, look, Guyon, we're a taxpayer group.
Sure.
We've got members that are smokers that are saying rightly, look, I already pay, according to Treasury, 4 times the amount I cost the health system. Of course we're going to advocate for that. We're a taxpayer group. We're going to point that out. That's the same point Treasury were making around that putting up taxes having a less and less effect. It's driving people underground in the illicit market. And it's driving retail crime and ram raids.
Okay, but to send someone to Panama, which no New Zealand newsroom would have been able to afford to do for a conference like that, shows a considerable interest. Shows a considerable interest in this policy. I'm just wondering whether the funding from it's BAT and PMI, Philip Morris, who are members of yours.
It's not my. It's not my place to dox who supports us.
No.
22,000 financial supporters.
You're the transparency guy. You just told me that.
And one of them has publicly said that
BAT
they're members. Yeah.
Yeah, and is Philip Morris as well?
I'm not going to go there, Guyon, because once I start ruling in or out members, you're going to get to people that
which is fine. But you can understand my questioning. It's not just a sort of a gotcha. Let's hang all the laundry out. No, hang on. It's because I think it's material to know who your backers are when you're advocating a certain position. And I'm wondering whether sending someone to Panama to oppose and mock, frankly, the World Health Organization was done partly because the tobacco companies are paying the bills.
The issue.
So who did pay for him to go over there? Who paid for him to go over there?
It was actually on the way. I can't remember if it was before or after, but there was a professional training thing around political marketing that staffer was going to in North America anyway. So it wasn't totally, it wasn't solely that. That's the first thing. But the reason I make the point about the vaping and New Zealand's success story is that what that closed-door session, it was a COP, Coalition of Parties,
Yes.
behind closed doors were arguing was to try to force an Australian-style bans on vaping across the world. And the reason that the taxpayer groups had got together across the road for, there was bad COP that was behind closed doors and they were hosting good COP behind open doors, is to actually, that is a debate worth having, because New Zealand does have a real success story there. And, come back to, smokers do pay a disproportionate amount of tax. It is a tiny percentage of our own overall work, as is the revenue from all the industry companies. We're talking less than 3%.
So what you'd get, a couple of 100,000 from, or at least 100,000 from the tobacco companies, wouldn't you?
No, I'm not going to slice and dice, but I'm saying between sugar, grog, soda, and your regulated industries, it's less than 3%. Our business model is New Zealanders that agree with the Taxpayers Union, that agree with our message around, fiscal restraint, around transparency, around accountability, around the huge problems New Zealanders face around government debt.
You've made that point well. Just to close the section out, we'll move on. Are you saying that you would have had the same policy on tobacco and vaping and pursued it as vigorously with or without the tobacco industry funding you get?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay,
because our positions on vaping absolutely match the anti-smoking groups like ASH.
Okay.
I've absolutely no doubt that we've been intellectually honest in that area.
Okay. Let's talk about your links with some of these international groups, and there's increasing interest in the Atlas network.
Incredibly.
Yeah, who would have thought? Is the Taxpayers Union a member of the Atlas network, or have you had support from them?
Of course, I'm really open about it. I find it just totally bizarre that this is suddenly an issue. There's literally someone tweeting that, the first rule of Atlas is not to talk about Atlas. Every single event.
So what is the Atlas network then, for the uninitiated?
I'll give you an example. So our most recent support from Atlas is one of our employees, our former investigations manager, went up and did some training in Kuala Lumpur and participated in something I think they call it Shark Tank, like a Dragon's Den type competition. And he pitched the campaign. And the Taxpayers Union literally tweeted him holding, I think it was 10,000 US, a 3-metre long cheque. And we congratulated the staff member for winning an award on a particular campaign pitch that staff
so
had done.
You've been transparent, that's fine.
Yeah.
How would you describe to a mate in the pub what the Atlas network is?
The Atlas network pulls together generally young but entrepreneurial people that lead or want to found free market think tanks around the world. Most of the work is done in the developing world. So my first experience was Atlas. I did something called the Think Tank MBA, incredible program. They picked me up, took me to Fairfax, Virginia, met my roommate, his name was Alex. I asked what he did. He said, I founded I think it was the Oslo Human Rights Foundation. I said, what's that? He said, well, we pick up dissidents like women's rights campaigners that have escaped Iran.
We won't go too far down. We won't go too far down.
It's incredible work that these guys are doing around the world.
It's roughly 450 right-wing think tanks around the world, right?
Yeah, I mean, you use right-wing there in a disparaging way, but it's free market, free trade,
right?
human rights, property rights. Yeah.
Have you been through any of their programs?
Yeah, just did the Think Tank MBA.
Yeah, so that was that funded by the Atlas Network?
Yeah. That's their pitch to donors is, you believe in free markets, free enterprise. In my lifetime, the free trade, open economies have arguably led 1 billion people out of poverty in my lifetime. They're in the business of selling those ideas, and their pitch is we help these groups on the ground around the world, put them together with mentorships, with training. When I set up the Taxpayers Union, remains one of my mantras is I'm not here to reinvent the wheel at the bottom of the world. What things like Atlas do and other groups I'm involved with is I want to share best practice, best ideas. It can be damn lonely setting up a think tank at the bottom of the world in your mid-20s.
So you got into this. So you got into this very young, and in fact, you got into politics pretty young, didn't you? You joined the Green Party in the sixth form out of concern about genetic engineering.
That's right. That's right. You have been reading the excellent book.
and you made something of a transition. While at Victoria University, interned for Don Brash. Was he a family friend of yours?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And then Stephen Franks into Franks Ogilvie.
Yeah, so I was I graduated at the right as the GFC was having an impact on accounting jobs in the big firms in New Zealand. I always thought I'd be an accountant, but I ended up in law. And
so what's the light bulb moment that takes you from a 15, 16-year-old joining the Green Party to hanging out with Don Brash and Stephen Franks on the right of the political spectrum? What was the light bulb moment there?
The light bulb for my particular interest in public affairs, and I can safely blame my mother for the political bug. She was on, when I was an infant on both the regional and district council in Hastings. But it was about when I was fourth form, so 14, 15. On the one hand, GE pulled me towards the Greens. The other big issue was I sat the last year of School C in the fourth form, and then the first year of NCEA in the fifth form as the guinea pig year. And just the dumbing down I witnessed as a 14-year-old. I covered it in the book. Our maths teacher gave us as a mock exam the School C maths from the year that my class was born, and about a third of the pages were crossed out. And we asked Murray Richardson, what's been replaced? And it's nothing. And if there was one moment where I thought, hang on, that this isn't right, with something wrong here, it was probably that. Now that pulled me towards the centre right. And obviously the GE issue pulled me towards the Greens.
So you describe yourself as a classical liberal, right? Perhaps a neoliberal? Anyway, you're a free market guy. Yeah, the thing is, when the crisis hits, no one's a neoliberal, right?
Well, one of the reasons I'm fiscally conservative...
When the earthquakes hit, who rebuilds it?
Yeah, I'm not...
When COVID hits... COVID hits, no one's a sort of person standing up for individual sort of...
Well, that's what, we did a report quite early on in COVID, and we argued, look, we're fiscal conservatives for a rainy day. It does look like a rainy day's coming, and well before there was any talk of a wage subsidy, we were arguing...
You argued for economic stimulus, didn't you?
Yeah.
And you say in your own words, in an unusual report for us, we concluded spend, baby, spend.
Yeah, that's right.
But now here you are today... arguing that the government spent too much and these programs are wasteful.
In fairness, it used it like a ratchet. It didn't turn the tap back off, and that's been the real... And, we are now paying for that. We've got a very long hangover because even after the lockdowns, government continued to expand and government debt continued to
So you're cool with the stimulus, but they should have turned it off earlier, right? Is that what you're saying?
That's right. But just to come back to... I'm a classical liberal. But the Taxpayers Union and I, we don't believe in no government. We're not capitalist anarchists sort of thing. We simply believe that there's some things only the government could do. It should focus on doing those well.
But I guess
doing so much often.
What I'm driving to debate with you at this moment is you have your theories on paper, but when they hit the real world, sometimes they explode. And when you were faced with a decision about whether to let staff go, whether to take a government handout on the COVID payments and this employment subsidy, what did you do? You took the taxpayers' money, didn't you?
Well, let's just explore that.
Well, you did, didn't you?
Firstly, yes. Obviously.
Yeah.
So January is always our quietest month. Of course, this was a meeting. It was about, I think, 20th of March. Was it 2020? January is always our quiet month. February was very slow. In March, just nothing was coming in. And even a month earlier, the idea that we would ever take government money was just unthinkable. And the conclusion I came to, I had two options. Dave Farrar and I discussed it. We can either take bad PR, I'll have to answer questions about this for the rest of my career, or I look staff in the eye, many of which do not share our politics. I deliberately hire across the political spectrum and say, I'm sorry, I can't pay you because we're choosing to avoid the bad PR. So we're not, because remember, it's not the organisation that takes the wage subsidy. It goes to the staff. So
that same dilemma is faced by every one of the public service bosses who's reacting to your and other people's advocacy and having to cut back staff, isn't it? That same problem. My point is that when faced with the reality of that decision, you did what you criticise everyone else for doing and put your hand out for taxpayers' money.
Well, no, hang on. We bounced back and immediately paid it back when we could. And we have gone out and pointed out all those businesses, and particularly the left-wing unions for which we can't figure out, we're reliant on donations. We can't figure out how many of the left-wing unions that it is just payroll deductions, how they had could qualify for the wage subsidy.
Okay,
but none of them have paid it back. We have, and look, I accept the criticism.
Is it hypocrisy?
And it was, the organisation has always been clear that we don't want to be reliant on taxpayers. At an unusual time, and it was the rainy day,
sure
and we are fiscally conservative for the rainy day. I think that to muddle that though with the subsequent economic story of where the government exploded in size and things that were totally unrelated to COVID.
No, I get that, and you've made the point well, that they should have turned the tap off earlier. I'm interested in your many examples of New Zealand taxing too much and spending too much taxpayers' money. You go and look at the happy index, right? The happiest countries in the world. The happiest countries in the world are the Scandinavian countries, so the most functional and happiest every time. Finland, Denmark, Sweden, all in the top 5. They're all high-tax countries, eh?
Yeah, so the thing is with the Scandinavian story, and I spent a little bit of time in Scandinavia a few years ago, actually visiting the Finnish taxpayer group.
They must have fun because Finland has a tax to GDP ratio of 43%. And the OECD average is 34%. If you look at Denmark and Sweden, they're both 41% against that OECD average of 34%. So, look, that might sound a bit technical, but basically they're taxing a hell of a lot more than New Zealand is, and they're consistently the happiest countries. What's your response to that?
Yeah, just let me respond. Okay, so 2 things. The first is, look at the Scandinavians. Yep, they've got big government. They also have very efficient and accountable delivery of services, often done by the private sector. You want to look at Norway's the other example held up. Do you want your private ambulance services competing? Because
it's a private ambulance service in New Zealand, actually.
Compete not on a sort of tendered competing basis.
So would you be okay with higher taxes as long as the money's spent well?
If the quality is there, we've got the worst of both. We're getting big government, but it's big, dumb, unaccountable government. The other thing is on the happiness index. What motivates me and gets me up in the morning is, I love New Zealand. New Zealand has so much to offer. It was the same motivation 10 years ago, but now that I've got 2 kids, it means even more. I don't want to have to feel guilty that I'm bringing my kids up in a country that is getting relatively poorer. Australia, the GDP per capita is a third more per person. Our choices in public policy are the reason why we're poor. We shouldn't have to settle for it. I want us to be the most prosperous we could be, and in many ways are, but we are underperforming. We shouldn't have to sacrifice, and our public policy choices mean we choose to be poor. That's what motivates me.
Okay, look, a couple of other things I want to get to in the last 8 minutes or so before we hit the 30-minute mark. Free speech, you founded or co-founded the Free Speech Union, and this is a huge issue all around the world at the moment. Where do you think New Zealand is at with the free speech debate? Because I see Victoria University have just postponed or possibly cancelled a free speech debate. AUT's having similar problems with their free speech debate because no one wants to be involved and there's issues there. Where are we at, in your view, with the free speech debate in New Zealand?
I think across the Western world, particularly the universities, are in a real state of crisis. And it's not me saying that. There are multiple surveys around the world, and the Free Speech Union has replicated it in New Zealand, asking academics and students their views on free speech and whether they feel safe expressing contrarian or controversial ideas. The very place, Guyon, where you go as a young person to think and express the dangerous thought experiments and things like that has actually turned into, and again, this is what the survey data shows, our most self-censoring part of society. I think it's a real problem. I'm not still on the board of the Free Speech Union. I'm very happily, it's on its own feet. It's got a fantastic chair and a great CEO, and it's going great guns and doing great work. For me, the success there was being able, I only have so many hours in the day, being able to move on.
Sure. Just one more question on that, just to push back and stress test your argument a little bit. I suppose the argument that those who are not opposed to free speech but think that this sort of stuff goes too far and can go into hate speech, that what they will say is it's okay for people like, well, me and you, frankly, both Pākehā New Zealanders from a dominant culture, to say, oh, come on, get your act together, harden up, and listen to stuff. Hang on, and listen to stuff that hurts you. But for smaller, more vulnerable groups, they argue. This is not my position. I'm laying out their argument. They argue that they are more fragile. And do you think that has some resonance?
That's a very paternal. I don't think that many minority groups would argue that they are more fragile. It's pretty
well, do you understand the argument of the opponents?
But I totally reject it. Yeah. Free speech, it's why a lot of minority groups or representatives from minority communities are getting more involved with the Free Speech Union, because they understand free speech is the canary in the coal mine often for the minority groups.
Did you support the ban on gang insignia?
I think that as an organisation, yes, they did. They took a principled approach on that.
Do you support the government legislating people what to wear?
See, one of the healthy debates in the Free Speech Union is there a distinction between free expression and free speech? See, what motivates me around free speech is the pursuit of truth.
Can I get an answer on? Do you support banning gang patches?
Do I support gang? Yeah. I'm in two minds about it. I think
really, because as a classical liberal, should the state tell you what to wear? Because that's what's happening.
It shouldn't.
That's what's happening now, eh?
No, it shouldn't. And it's a degree. It pivots, I think, on the question of whether you can argue it is intimidating or not, because that is where do I draw the line?
So what's your position?
I wouldn't.
Come on, you're a one-man think tank. Give me an answer.
If I was in politics, I'd probably have to vote for it because I'm on the centre right. No, in principle, I don't.
You don't support the government's position?
No, I don't. I don't. I think that's the principal position. However, I think that's more a freedom of expression question than a freedom of speech.
Yes, it is. Yeah, I grant you that. I want to talk in the 4 minutes or so we've got left a little bit about lobbying. Prime Minister Hipkins, he to a degree was going down the path of cracking down on lobbying in New Zealand and trying to get some rules around what is a completely unfettered and unregulated market. This is, for the uninitiated, people who hire third-party lobby firms and try and get their point or their legislation or their government policy across the line. Do you think we need to tighten up on that sphere?
I think we do. I think that New Zealand, already being a small society where everyone knows each other, I worry that we're just all a little bit too relaxed about it. And we have in New Zealand, frankly, a revolving door. I mean, I don't want to pick on the individual, but he's the one the most recent that springs to mind is Chris Farfoy. He's minister 1 week, gone, and literally within a matter of days as a website advertising his services and his connections. So he will be lobbying not only the insider information that he's selling, but lobbying his former officials. But it's not just at the politicians' level, it's the staff in the minister's office. So it's literally the ministerial staff where there's no restriction on this revolving door. I think that's a real mischief.
And other countries have it. I mean, Australia has 18 months. You go out to Canada,
it's 5 years.
5 years, yes, you're right.
We're on the same page.
So you believe that we should have measures that restrict that revolving door?
Yeah, well, I mean, it is, my philosophy, I'm inherently suspicious of abuses of government power. And I think that, it is a worry where you have officials sort of the revolving door between industry and the regulators.
Should they have to register, as they do in Australia, and have a publicly disclosable register?
That's a harder question because you've got a definition problem of what is lobbying. And I think that, we've talked about the disadvantage of being a small society. One of the advantages is, to be frank, for any New Zealander can pay $5 or $10 to join one of the large political parties, and you'll almost certainly get some face time with the minister.
Are you a lobbyist?
Well, we're a pressure group. We have our North Star is lower taxes, less waste, more accountability. That's one of the questions you would ask is, what do you say to ministers when you talk to them. Well, it's just that. We've got an agenda, but we wear it on our sleeve.
And where are you going to take that agenda next? Is it to central politics?
Well, I mean, every day we hold the government.
Yeah, but
to
yourself,
account. Yeah.
where does Jordan Williams go next? You've been 10 years at the head of this.
Well, I've always been able to write off that question by saying, look, my brand would only work at a time of fiscal challenge or crisis. Look, I'm in an incredible job where, that thanks to the support of literally tens of thousands of New Zealanders, all of the staff at the Taxpayers Union, we get to get up in the morning and fight for a more prosperous New Zealand.
Are you going to do that in central politics? Are you looking at a career there?
I don't think so. Let's go back to your gang patch question.
Well, you haven't got long. You've got 30 seconds.
One of the things that's great is we can stay principled. In politics, you've got to sacrifice those principles and compromise and things like that. I love that the North Star for us is the mission, the vision, rather than having to sacrifice those principles.
Thank you very much for coming in. Really appreciate your time on 30. That was 30 Minutes with Jordan Williams. This is 30 with Guyon Espiner. We'll see you next time.